In the spring of 2001, life moved slowly in the small town of Ashford, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew the name of the local sheriff, where high school football games filled the bleachers every Friday night, and where people rarely locked their doors before bed. For most residents, it felt like the safest place in the world. 23-year-old Melissa Carter had spent her entire life there. She worked mornings at a family-owned diner just off State Route 17 and spent most evenings helping her mother care for her younger brother. Friends described her as dependable, the kind of person who never missed a birthday, never forgot a promise, and always answered the phone. She wasn't the type to disappear. At least that's what everyone believed. On May 11, 2001, Melissa finished her shift shortly after 4 Several customers remembered seeing her that afternoon. One elderly couple later told investigators she seemed perfectly normal. She joked with coworkers, refilled coffee cups, talked about attending a graduation party that weekend. Nothing about her behavior suggested anything unusual. At approximately 4:18 p.m., Melissa clocked out. Security records confirmed the time. She left through the back employee entrance carrying a small canvas purse and a denim jacket. Her silver sedan was parked in its usual spot. Witnesses watched her drive away. It was the last confirmed sighting of her, at least the last confirmed sighting anyone could prove. When Melissa failed to arrive home that evening, her mother wasn't immediately alarmed. Traffic delays happened. Unexpected errands happened. Life happened. But by 8:30 p.m., concern began replacing patience. Calls to Melissa's phone went unanswered. Friends hadn't seen her. Coworkers hadn't heard from her. Around midnight, her family contacted local police. The responding officer initially classified the situation as a routine missing adult report. After all, Melissa was 23 years old, legally free to leave whenever she wanted. Still, something felt wrong. Her mother kept repeating the same sentence. She would have called. The next morning, investigators began retracing Melissa's known movements. The route from the diner to her house took less than 15 minutes, a straight drive, no complicated turns, no isolated highways, yet somehow she never arrived. Detectives interviewed coworkers, friends, neighbors, former classmates. Nothing stood out. Then on the second day, a small development changed the tone of the investigation. A gas station employee located roughly 6 miles from the diner reported seeing Melissa shortly after she left work. Security footage showed her entering the store around 4:37 p.m. The timestamp appeared legitimate. Melissa purchased a bottle of water and a pack of gum. Nothing unusual, but investigators noticed something else. When she exited the store, she briefly looked over her shoulder toward the parking lot. Then she paused. Only for a second. Yet something about the expression on her face caught detectives' attention. It wasn't fear exactly, more like uncertainty, as though she recognized someone she wasn't expecting to see. The footage quality was poor. The camera angle offered little detail. The parking lot itself wasn't visible, but investigators couldn't ignore the possibility. Who was outside, and why had Melissa reacted that way? Unfortunately, no answers came. The trail quickly went cold. 3 days later, another piece of information surfaced. A local mechanic named Gary Holloway contacted police. He claimed he had seen a silver sedan parked near an abandoned service road outside town on the same evening Melissa disappeared. The description matched her vehicle. At first, detectives assumed it was a coincidence. Hundreds of similar cars existed throughout Ohio. Still, they checked. The service road led into a heavily wooded area, once used by construction crews decades earlier. Search teams arrived the following morning. What they found immediately raised new questions. Hidden behind a cluster of trees sat Melissa's car. The vehicle appeared untouched. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. No obvious evidence of violence. Her purse remained inside. So did her driver's license. The keys were gone. But nearly everything else seemed undisturbed. For investigators, that detail was troubling. People planning to disappear usually took their identification, their money, their personal belongings. Melissa had left everything behind. Crime scene technicians processed the vehicle carefully. Several fingerprints were recovered. Most belonged to Melissa. Others matched family members and coworkers. Nothing unexpected. Then a technician discovered something unusual. A partial fingerprint on the exterior passenger side door. The print was incomplete, too small for immediate identification. But it clearly didn't belong to Melissa, at least not according to preliminary analysis. Detectives now faced a different possibility. Someone else had been near the vehicle, perhaps even inside it. The woods surrounding the service road were searched extensively. Volunteers joined local authorities. Canine teams combed through brush and creek beds. Helicopters surveyed from above. Days passed. Nothing. No clothing. No phone. No sign of Melissa. The disappearance began attracting media attention. Local newspapers ran daily updates. Television crews arrived from neighboring counties. The story spread across Ohio. As pressure increased, detectives started examining Melissa's personal life more closely. Former relationships, financial records, phone logs, every detail mattered. Then another discovery emerged, one that would shift the entire investigation. A review of Melissa's phone records revealed a call placed to her cell phone less than 20 minutes before she arrived at the gas station. The number wasn't saved in her contacts. It belonged to a prepaid phone, unregistered, untraceable. The conversation lasted exactly 47 seconds. No recording existed. No one knew what was said. But investigators now had a mystery. Someone had contacted Melissa shortly before she vanished. Someone who had taken deliberate steps to remain anonymous. Weeks turned into months. The unidentified fingerprint remained unmatched. The prepaid phone led nowhere. Search efforts slowed. Public interest gradually faded. And yet one question refused to disappear. Who made that 47-second call? Because years later, when advances in forensic technology finally reopened the case, detectives would discover something about that number that changed everything they thought they knew. And when they traced where it had really come from, they realized Melissa Carter may not have been chosen at random at all. By the autumn of 2001, the search for Melissa Carter had transformed from an urgent rescue effort into something far more frustrating. A mystery. For nearly 5 months, investigators chased every lead they could find. Most ended exactly the same way. Nowhere. The abandoned service road where Melissa's car had been discovered remained the center of attention. Detectives returned repeatedly, convinced they had missed something during the initial search. The area itself was strange. Old County. Records showed the road had once connected to a construction staging site in the late 1970s. Most of the equipment had been removed decades earlier, but portions of the route remained hidden beneath overgrown brush and thick patches of trees. Locals rarely went there. Hunters avoided it. Even teenagers looking for places to drink on weekends preferred other spots. The road simply led nowhere, or so everyone thought. In September, investigators expanded their search radius. Ground teams covered nearly 8 square miles. Cadaver dogs were brought in from neighboring counties. The results were disappointing. Until one dog alerted near a shallow drainage ditch approximately half a mile from where Melissa's vehicle had been found. Hope surged. The area was immediately secured. Crime scene technicians spent 2 days excavating the site. When the work was complete, all they had recovered was an old denim jacket buried beneath leaves and mud. At first glance, it looked promising. Melissa had left work wearing one, but forensic testing quickly ruled it out. The jacket belonged to someone else, another dead end. Still, something about that location bothered investigators. The dog had reacted strongly. Experienced handlers insisted the alert wasn't random. Something had been there. Whether it was connected to Melissa remained unknown. Meanwhile, detectives focused on the mysterious prepaid phone. The 47-second call remained the most significant clue in the case. Phone company records revealed the device had been activated only 3 weeks before Melissa disappeared. It had made very few calls. Most lasted less than a minute. Then, just days after Melissa vanished, the phone went silent forever. No further activity. No billing records. Nothing. Detectives believed the phone had been purchased specifically to avoid identification. But by whom? That question became even more important after another discovery emerged. Several calls made from the same prepaid device had connected with a payphone located nearly 30 miles away. The payphone sat outside an aging truck stop along Interstate 71. Security footage no longer existed. Witnesses remembered nothing. Yet investigators now had a location. It wasn't much, but it was more than they had before. As detectives worked the phone angle, another lead surfaced unexpectedly. A woman named Rachel Mercer contacted police after seeing a television segment about Melissa's disappearance. Rachel claimed she had witnessed something unusual the day Melissa vanished. According to her statement, she had been driving home shortly before 5 IT when she noticed a silver sedan stopped near an intersection outside town. The vehicle resembled Melissa's car. What caught Rachel's attention wasn't the car. It was the pickup truck parked behind it. The truck appeared dark blue, older model, possibly a Ford. She remembered because both vehicles seemed oddly positioned, almost as though the drivers were talking through open windows. Rachel couldn't identify either person. The observation lasted only seconds, but it introduced a new possibility. Melissa might not have been alone. Detectives spent weeks attempting to locate the truck. Thousands of registration records were reviewed. Nothing useful emerged. No witnesses came forward. No surveillance footage existed. The lead faded like so many others. By winter, frustration began taking its toll. Melissa's family attended every press conference, every community meeting, every search event. They refused to give up. Her mother often carried a photograph showing Melissa smiling at a county fair 2 years earlier. Reporters saw it so frequently it became symbolic of the case itself. Yet despite the public attention, answers remained painfully absent. Then, just before Christmas, investigators received an anonymous letter. The envelope contained no return address. No fingerprints, no identifying marks. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Only one sentence had been typed. "Look where the road ends." Nothing else, no explanation, no signature. At first, detectives considered it a cruel prank, unfortunately missing. Person investigations often attracted attention seekers. But something about the message stood out. The abandoned service road technically did end, several miles beyond Melissa's vehicle location, near a forgotten section of county-owned property. The area had never been thoroughly examined, because it fell outside the original search perimeter. On the first week of January 2002, investigators decided to check anyway. The weather was brutal. Snow covered much of the ground. Search conditions were poor. Still, teams pushed forward. At the far end of the road, hidden beneath years of overgrowth, they discovered something unexpected. Concrete foundations, rusted fencing, fragments of machinery, the remains of an old maintenance facility abandoned decades earlier. Nothing connected directly to Melissa, at least not immediately. But during the search, one investigator noticed fresh tire tracks leading away from the property. Fresh. Not old. Not weathered. Recent. Someone had been there. Recently enough for the tracks to survive winter conditions. That discovery changed the atmosphere instantly. If someone was still visiting the site, why? And more importantly, did they know something about Melissa's disappearance? Detectives began monitoring the area. Unmarked vehicles were stationed nearby. Officers conducted periodic surveillance. Weeks passed without incident. Then, one cold February evening, a deputy observed headlights moving through the property shortly after midnight. By the time backup arrived, the vehicle was gone. But investigators found something left behind. Near one of the old buildings sat a disposable camera, partially buried beneath snow, undamaged, unopened. Inside were 24 photographs. Most showed empty sections of forest, old machinery, abandoned structures. Nothing remarkable, until investigators reached the final image. The last photograph showed a silver sedan parked beside trees, the same model as Melissa's. The timestamp indicated the picture had been taken just 2 days before her disappearance. And standing near the driver's side door was a man, his face partially obscured, his identity unknown. But one thing was immediately clear. The photograph had not been taken by police, which meant someone had been watching Melissa before she vanished. And whoever took that picture had never come forward. The discovery of the disposable camera changed the investigation in a way few expected. For nearly a year, detectives had been chasing possibilities. Now, for the first time, they had something tangible. Someone had photographed Melissa's car before she disappeared. That meant one of two things. Either the photographer was connected to her disappearance, or they had unknowingly captured someone who was. Investigators immediately sent the photographs to the state crime lab. The image quality was poor. The man, standing beside the vehicle, appeared partially turned away from the camera. His face remained hidden beneath shadows and distance. Still, forensic analysts believed modern enhancement techniques might reveal useful details. Weeks turned into months. Unfortunately, the results were disappointing. The man's face remained unidentifiable. However, analysts did uncover something else. The individual appeared to be wearing a work jacket. On the back was a faint rectangular patch. The image wasn't clear enough to read the lettering, but it resembled the type of uniform commonly issued by maintenance contractors, utility workers, or county service employees. The lead was frustratingly vague, yet detectives pursued it anyway. Over the next year, investigators interviewed dozens of former county workers, contractors, road crews, and utility employees. Nothing connected directly to Melissa. Eventually, resources dwindled. The task force was reduced. Other cases demanded attention. And slowly, the Carter investigation entered the stage every family fears. Cold case status. By 2005, public attention had largely disappeared. New crimes filled newspaper headlines. Television stations stopped calling. The reward fund dried up. Melissa's missing person poster remained hanging in a few local businesses, its edges faded by sunlight. For her family, however, time never moved forward. Birthdays became painful reminders. Holidays left empty chairs at the table. Every unanswered question lingered. Every phone call brought a brief flash of hope. Then disappointment. Melissa's mother continued attending annual missing persons events across Ohio. She spoke to reporters whenever she could, not because she believed publicity would solve the case, but because she feared something worse, being forgotten. Years passed, then more years. Technology advanced. People changed. Entire generations grew up without knowing Melissa's name. But in 2019, something unexpected happened. A newly assigned detective, named Sarah Bennett, was reviewing archived cold cases inside the county records building. Bennett specialized in unresolved disappearances. Unlike many investigators before her, she wasn't emotionally connected to the original theories. She approached the file with fresh eyes. Fresh eyes often notice old mistakes. As she reviewed thousands of pages of reports, photographs, interviews, and evidence logs, one detail caught her attention immediately: the unidentified fingerprint recovered from Melissa's car. Back in 2001, the print had been searched through available databases. No match. At the time, forensic technology was limited compared to modern standards. Bennett ordered the print reanalyzed using updated systems. The results surprised everyone. The fingerprint still didn't match any criminal database, but it did match a partial print found years later during an unrelated investigation involving abandoned county-owned property. The connection seemed random at first. Yet both prints pointed toward the same individual, someone who had never been identified, someone who had somehow appeared in two completely separate investigations. Bennett requested every available report connected to the second fingerprint. That decision would become the turning point in the entire case. The files led investigators back to the abandoned maintenance facility discovered near the end of the service road years earlier. The same location mentioned in the anonymous letter. The same property where the disposable camera had been found, and buried inside old records was something investigators had overlooked for nearly 2 decades. A maintenance log, dated April 2001. Just weeks before Melissa vanished. The document listed several contractors assigned to temporary repair work on county property. Most names checked out. One did not. A man named Thomas Grady. The record showed he worked briefly in the area before abruptly leaving the job. No forwarding address, no employment references, no explanation. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, until detectives discovered something unusual. Thomas Grady technically didn't exist, at least not legally. The Social Security number attached to the employment file belonged to a deceased individual. The address was fake. The emergency contact listed on paperwork could not be located. Everything about the identity appeared fabricated. For the first time in years, investigators felt genuine momentum. Whoever Thomas Grady was, he had gone to considerable lengths to hide himself. The question was why. Detectives reopened the search. Former supervisors were interviewed, old payroll records examined, archived photographs recovered from storage. Eventually, investigators located a group photograph taken during a county maintenance project in the spring of 2001. 7 workers stood in the image. One man immediately drew attention: tall dark hair, work jacket. And most importantly, a face that looked remarkably similar to the unidentified man captured beside Melissa's vehicle in the disposable camera photograph. The resemblance wasn't perfect. The images were separated by distance and quality limitations, but it was enough. Investigators finally had a person of interest. As they dug deeper, another discovery emerged. Thomas Grady, or whoever he really was, had been linked to multiple temporary jobs across Ohio during the late 1990s and early 2000s. He never stayed long, never rented property under his own name, never established permanent ties. Then, after 2002, he vanished completely. No employment history, no tax records, nothing. It was as though he had disappeared from society. The deeper detectives looked, the stranger the pattern became. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. In early 2020, forensic analysts managed to recover data from an old storage box that had remained untouched since the original investigation. Inside was evidence collected from Melissa's car. Among the Pausiaka items was a single strand of hair recovered from the passenger seat. In 2001, the sample had been too degraded for meaningful testing. Modern DNA technology told a different story. The profile was male, and it did not belong to any known member of Melissa's family. The DNA was uploaded into a national genealogy database. Weeks passed, then months. Finally, investigators received a notification. The sample had produced a distant familial connection, not a direct match, but enough to begin building a family tree. What detectives uncovered next would shock everyone involved. Because the DNA wasn't leading them toward Thomas Grady. It was leading them toward a completely different identity. An identity connected to a violent crime committed hundreds of miles away years earlier. And when investigators finally discovered who the man really was, they realized Melissa Carter's disappearance had never been an isolated case. It was part of something much bigger. The breakthrough arrived quietly. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, just a phone call from a forensic genealogist to Detective Sarah Bennett in the summer of 2020. The DNA recovered from Melissa Carter's passenger seat had finally produced a workable family connection. The match wasn't close enough to identify a suspect directly, but it was enough to build a family tree. For months, investigators worked backward through public records, birth certificates, census data, and archived documents. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The unknown DNA belonged to a man whose real name was likely Daniel Mercer, not Thomas Grady. Daniel Mercer, the name, immediately triggered concern among investigators. Mercer had been questioned years earlier in connection with an assault investigation in western Pennsylvania. No charges were ever filed. The evidence had been insufficient. Still, his name remained buried inside law enforcement databases. What disturbed detectives even more was his history. Mercer frequently worked temporary labor jobs. Construction, Sites on maintenance projects. Road crews short-term. Contracts that allowed him to move from place to place without attracting attention. Exactly the pattern investigators had seen under the false identity of Thomas Grady. The timeline matched perfectly. The physical description matched. And when forensic artists compared age progressed images to the man in the disposable camera photograph, the similarities became impossible to ignore. For the first time in nearly 20 years, detectives believed they knew who had been standing beside Melissa's car. The problem was finding him because Daniel Mercer had vanished years earlier. No driver's license renewals, no tax filings, no property records. Nothing. Investigators expanded their search nationally. Months passed, then another break came from an unexpected source. A retired deputy in Kentucky contacted Detective Bennett after seeing a news segment about the reopened case. The deputy remembered arresting a drifter during a traffic stop in 2008. The man had used multiple aliases. One of them was Thomas Grady. At the time, the arrest involved only minor charges. The man disappeared after posting bond. But fingerprints had been taken. When those fingerprints were compared against the unidentified print recovered from Melissa's vehicle in 2001, the result was immediate. Match after 19 years. Investigators finally knew who had touched Melissa's car. The evidence now moved quickly. Using the fingerprint confirmation, detectives reconstructed Mercer's movements throughout. 2001 employment records showed he had been working less than 10 miles from Ashford during the weeks before Melissa vanished. Phone analysis revealed something even more disturbing. The prepaid phone that had called Melissa shortly before her disappearance had been purchased from a convenience store located near one of Mercer's temporary job sites. Surveillance footage no longer existed, but purchase records confirmed the timing. Investigators now believed Mercer had targeted Melissa before she disappeared. The question was why. The answer emerged from interviews with former co-workers. One woman remembered Mercer visiting the diner where Melissa worked several times during the spring of 2001. At first, his visits seemed harmless. He sat alone, ordered coffee, stayed longer than necessary. Nothing criminal, nothing alarming. But looking back, she remembered something unusual. Mercer always requested the same table, one that provided a clear view of Melissa's section. Another co-worker recalled Melissa mentioning a customer who made her uncomfortable. She never reported harassment, never filed a complaint. She simply brushed it off. At the time, nobody considered it important. Now it felt critical. Investigators concluded Mercer had likely become fixated on her, not because they knew each other, because they didn't. It appeared to be a stranger obsession, one built silently over weeks, possibly months. The reconstruction that followed was heartbreaking. On May 11, 2001, Mercer contacted Melissa using the prepaid phone. Investigators believe he convinced her to meet briefly after work, perhaps under false pretenses, perhaps by pretending to need help. The exact reason would never be known, but evidence suggested she voluntarily drove toward the service road area. At some point, the encounter changed. Exactly how remained unclear. What investigators did know was that Melissa never left. Searches conducted in 2001 had come painfully close to the truth. Less than a mile from where her vehicle was discovered stood a neglected concrete drainage structure hidden beneath thick vegetation. The location had never been fully examined because access was difficult and visibility was poor. In late 2021, following Mercer's identification, investigators returned to the site. Ground-penetrating radar revealed an anomaly beneath collapsed debris. Excavation began. Several weeks later, they found human remains. Dental records confirmed the identity: Melissa Carter, 20 years after she vanished. The announcement devastated the community. Yet for the family, it ended an uncertainty that had lasted 2 decades. For years, they had lived between hope and grief. Now they finally knew Melissa wasn't coming home. The medical examiner determined that decomposition and environmental damage prevented an exact cause of death from being established. However, evidence strongly supported homicide. Combined with the fingerprint evidence, DNA recovery, witness statements, and reconstructed timeline, prosecutors believed they had enough to charge Mercer. There was only one problem. Daniel Mercer had died years earlier. Investigators eventually discovered he had passed away from natural causes in 2014 while living under another false identity in a neighboring state. The man who spent years hiding had escaped prosecution, but not exposure. In early 2022, authorities officially announced the resolution of the case. The evidence left little doubt Daniel Mercer was responsible for Melissa Carter's disappearance and death. The news spread across Ohio. Many residents remembered exactly where they had been when Melissa first vanished. Now, 2 decades later, they finally had an answer. Memorial service was held that spring. Hundreds attended. Former classmates, co-workers, neighbors, retired investigators, even volunteers who had searched the woods back in 2001. Melissa's mother stood before the crowd holding the same photograph. She had carried for years. The edges were worn, the colors faded, but the smile remained unchanged. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "People told us to move on," she said, "but how do you move on when you don't know where your child is?" "Today we finally know," many cried, even some detectives. For Detective Sarah Bennett, the case became a reminder of why cold case work matters. Not every investigation ends with an arrest. Not every family gets complete justice, but sometimes they get truth. And sometimes truth is enough to let a wound begin healing. Yet one mystery still remains. When investigators reviewed the evidence one final time, they found something they could never fully explain. The anonymous letter, the one received in December 2001. Look where the road ends. The envelope contained no DNA, no fingerprints, no traceable evidence, nothing. Who sent it? A witness? An accomplice? Someone carrying guilt? Or someone who knew exactly what happened but never came forward? The answer was never found. The case file officially lists the letter as an unresolved element, a single loose thread in an otherwise completed investigation. And perhaps that's fitting, because even when science uncovers the truth, some mysteries refuse to disappear entirely. Daniel Mercer thought he got away. For years, he did. But eventually evidence caught up with him. A fingerprint, a strand of hair, a forgotten photograph. Tiny pieces of a story buried beneath time. And together, they finally brought Melissa Carter home.